Good afternoon. For the 3 days, we'll be talking about the thinkers. Time and again I have said that those who are taking mains with the sociology or those who will be picking sociology, irrespective of their background, apart from knowing that how sociology emerged, what was the nature, the scope and the relationship and the methodological concerns, one of the most important unit in sociology is basically unit 4, where the sociological thinkers will be coming out. I always call thinkers to be heart and soul in sociology, particularly in the mains. Because if you have a good conceptual clarity, if you have good structural understanding of the thinkers, it becomes easier in part of you to fetch more marks in a first paper. And almost every other unit, right from the unit 2 to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, somewhere these all 6 thinkers will be used. Even their relevance, even they are to be used in a second paper as well. And that in that perspective, today in a very brief we'll be talking about the 2 dimensions. You might have gone through the thinkers, and within these 70 days you might be going through 1 or 2 times all the entire thinkers. Let's recall back. The 2 which we'll be picking up today is Karl Marx and Emile Durkheim, the 2 prominent scholars in a sociological tradition. They would be counted as a treasure. And particularly we'll begin with the Karl Marx. I always say that when we are talking about the Karl Marx, read it in a one go without thinking anything. Your first perspective is to know what the thinker is talking about. And then you look at the syllabus and try to segmentalize whatever you have read according to the themes which have been written in the syllabus. You begin from anywhere. You will find about that how Marx or Marxian theory comes in totality. Everything would be included somewhere with every themes. So here when you talk about, I always say that give some time, half an hour or 1 hour, to understand the socio-historical background of the thinkers. And look at the conditions within which the thinker has emerged out. No philosopher is a wild plant that it will groom anywhere. Every philosopher is a product of his own time. So you need to understand those socio-historical conditions within which the thinker or philosopher has emerged and his theory has found its currency. Now broadly, if I talk about in terms of the socio-historical changes, Marx's life coincided with witnessing the changes in European countries from agrarian to industrial. So this is the first transition from agrarian to industrial. And particularly when we started looking at the transition from agrarian to industrial, you will find about the emergence of a working class which will be the major theme in a Marxian theory. And then the number 2, we will be finding about that how impact of French Revolution of 1789 and more precisely the 2 other revolutions that took place, 1830s and 1848, in which we find about that how they established a bourgeois society. But not merely the establishment of the bourgeois society, but there also emerged the anti-bourgeois socialist left. And in this very perspective, the ideas of socialism that we are talking about, Saint Simon and others, Charles Fourier, Robert Owen, but particularly Saint Simon. So that way the ideas of socialism have started emerging out. That how this optimism is emerging out that workers will grab power. And the third one is basically impact of Hegel. And more precisely, the concept of dialectics, which Marx borrowed, but somehow or other rejected the dialectical idealism of Hegel and replaced with historical materialism or materialistic interpretation of a history, which as a philosophical doctrine is basically talking about that how all institutions, human societies, are the outgrowth of the economic activities or the materialistic activities. Thoughts and social institutions, development, they all are basically part of the superstructure founded on the economic base. In a very simple sentence, how the material condition affects society's structure and development. And it will also be making you understand the change in the modes of production. So the impact of Hegel is dialectics that will be important, which we will be talking about in the methodology of Marx. And then impact of British politico economic system and precisely labor theory of value. Within which you will be finding about that how Marx moves toward the concept that is called the theory of surplus value. In a very simple sentence, we will be talking about exchange and use value. But in a very simple sentence, what worker produces and what worker gets has a difference. That difference could be understood with the theory of surplus value. Now when we are looking at the labor theory of value, and if this is I am talking about the marker, the labor theory of value says that the value of a commodity is determined by the amount of work gone into it. But Marx says before the production begins, some amount has already been invested, some value has already been invested. And the rest of the value which will be added in the process of production would basically be added by the workers. So why it is so that the worker what he produces gets only one part of it? And within this very perspective, somewhere opposite Adam Smith and others, Marxian theory will find its evolution. And once you have looked at this one, then Marx's life also coincided with a certain kind of changes taking place, either in terms of the technological development or the political struggles for the land and power. These all were the certain socio-historical conditions within which you will be finding about the Marxian theory. I always say that three perspectives. Here, Saint Simon, socialism, Hegel, dialectics, and Adam Smith, labor theory of value, within which you will be finding about the surplus, theory of surplus value. There is nothing new here. And let me also request you that when you read a thinker, do not be guided by the certain kind of critical perspective unless and until you have understood what the thinker is saying about. You need to understand, I have always said the critic is a better learner, more learned than that of the scholar. So you just go through, understand it, develop the concepts, because you are the future of the thinker. The time has changed, the social structure has witnessed transition or transformation. within which how will we finding about the relevance that has to be talked about. And when we talk about theory, when we talk about the dynamics of change, in the dynamics of change, we will be talking about the laws of dialectics. And precisely the three laws, Greek word dialogo, with which means to argue. But the purpose of that argument is to arrive at a conclusion. The law of transformation from quantity to quality and quality to quantity. Law of union of opposites and the law of negation of negation. Marx has said that Hegel raised a very good question, that what makes history move? But he arrived at a wrong conclusion. If you want to render the truth, it is not the idea, but the materialistic condition, materialistic interpretation will render you the truth. And thus, when you are looking at Hegel, who has given the primacy on the idea, that would basically be rejected and will be replaced by the materialistic interpretation in history, which we are popularly calling historical materialism. And in this very perspective, we also talk about, the moment you talk about the dialectics, you basically talk about the methodological concern of Marx, in which we will be talking about materialistic interpretation of history, which is popularly called historical materialism. I just said in a very brief, what historical materialism is about, and what has been the prime concern in history. You are what you think, you are what you eat, and that was the difference between the dialectical idealism versus dialectical materialism that will be understood by you. To think, one has to live. To live, one has to eat. To eat, one has to produce. Thus the nature of man is economic. And in every history, the prime concern of history is what? The prime concern in history is basically the satisfaction of the basic need of the mankind. So when you talk about what is the first historical act, the first historical act, according to Marx, is basically the production of the things to satisfy the needs. It is the fundamental condition for all history. The satisfaction of this need seems to be the fundamental condition of all history. And thus Marx constructs his methodological base in the forms of materialism and argues that Hegel ignores the material world in which he lived. Hegel uses the means of livelihood, permitting him to exist as a body and with brain, capable of philosophizing. Fallacy is that Hegel focuses on idea and ignores that idea is actually the product of material world. And the moment you say the idea is basically a product of material world, the infrastructure superstructure dichotomy will emerge out, and that way we will be understanding that one, recognizing that one. When Marx said that when we are looking at Hegel, dialectics is a powerful logic, being capable of demonstrating the laws of social development. But Marx says that in Hegel's hand, dialectics went mystification. That is standing on his head. I put it down. Marx is talking about himself. I put it down on his feet, implying that Marxian dialectical materialism is Hegel's dialectical idealism upside down. However, Marx also says that my dialectical method is not only different from Hegel, but also in direct opposition. Because idea is nothing, I repeat, idea is nothing but material world reflected by human mind and translated into the forms of thoughts. To think, man has to live. To live, man has to satisfy material needs. Hence, the first premise of all human activities or existence and all history is that man must be in position to live in order to able to make history. Life involves before anything eating, drinking, clothing, habitation and many other things. And thus once again I repeat the line. Thus first historical act is the production of these things to satisfy the needs. And in this very perspective, the way Hegel has given focus, primacy to the idea, that was rejected. But dialectics as a very powerful logical method was retained by Marx in his methodological contour. And Marx rejected the idealistic claim that idea can arise, act independently of social context. Now what the idealist, what the Hegelian perspective that is basically talking about? That idea can arise, can act independently of the social context. But rather to Marx, all social phenomena and human conscience are produced by the materialistic cause. And the cause lies in the economic arrangement of society, that is, modes of production. So here when you talk about here, we'll be talking about, in brief we talk about what historical materialism is. But let me say that you will not be able to understand historical materialism unless and until you talk about dialectical idealism of Hegel. Even if they are asking so many questions on historical materialism, give some base of the emergence of the method of historical interpretation or materialistic interpretation of history, in which you will have to give the passing reference of the Hegel as well. Give some time, give some lines to Hegel, and within this you go through the materialistic interpretation of a history. And once you have done this one, then you will finding about it how. I repeat the line, that when we are looking at in very simple sentence what historical materialism is, then up to here whatever I have said, it implies that materialistic condition affects society's structure and development. The materialistic condition comprise the production, in which these modes of production we talked about. We'll be talking about the forces of production and relations of production. To satisfy these basic needs, at one hand man establishes link with the tools, technologies, techniques, this is the forces of production, and also establishes link with the other man, that is the relations of production. So when we talk about modes of production, we are talking about forces of production plus relations of production. But you also need to know that when these two components of modes of production, that we are talking about forces of production, relations of productions, they become factor for one another, F-E-T-T-R. I am quoting Marx, if they become factors for one another, the background of social revolution will be emerging out. So here, I am not talking about this, we are talking about in terms of that if the technology has somewhere not led to the growth of relationship, has become the factors, then the background of social relationship will emerge out. It is a historical necessity. So you talk about in brief of this dynamics change with the dialectics, dialectics law. How Marx has borrowed the concept of dialectics from Hegel. give 2 or 3 lines on terms of dialectical idealism. And why Marx, though retains dialectics but does not provide primacy to idea but goes to the materialistic one. The lines which I have said, that life involves anything or before anything, eating, drinking. It means the first premise of all human existence and all history is that man must be in position to live, and within which the first historical act is the satisfaction of these needs, and it is the fundamental condition for all history, and which makes Marx to form his methodological construct in materialism. Materialistic condition is key to man's social life, and changes in these processes are responsible for all historical developments. Once you have done this one, then some other concepts will come out in the themes which are there in terms of modes of production which you are talking about here. Alright. And then we will be talking about in terms of alienation, class struggle. And that way, that very historical materialism as a methodology which we are talking about, that has to be understood, that has to be very clear, conceptually clear. And even when we are talking about the class struggle is nothing but the corollary of historical materialism. So if I rub it out and give you an outline of historical materialism, so we are talking about dialectics borrowed from Hegel, but Marx rejects idea and replaces it with materialism. And the lines which I have talked about, in which we will be placing the materialistic condition. Once you have done it, then we need to talk about that how all institutions of the human societies are outgrowth of the economic activities. Thoughts, social institutions, they all are developed dependent on, founded on the economic base, and thus infrastructure, suprastructure perspective that will be coming out. So, and if I talk about an outline of then look at that in terms of whatever I said. After this, you can draw this diagram. This is primary, base in society, and this is secondary. Legal, political, religion, ideas, all will be part of superstructure. All are part of the superstructure. And we talk about the infrastructure. This is basically economic. in which we will be talking about the modes of production. Modes of production is constituted of two, that is forces of production and relations of production. Forces of production is constituted of means of production and labor power. And relations of production is constituted of social formation and contending classes. And when you're talking about that how the Western society has evolved, what are the phases through it has gone, then we find about you might have gone through that how from primitive communism to slave or ancient society, in which we have found master and the slaves. From there, feudal lord and the serf, and from there, capitalist, bourgeois and proletariat, and from there we'll be having the future orientation. Socialism and communism. So in the slave society, the social formation, the contending class is master and slaves. In a feudal, lord and serf. In a capitalist, bourgeois and proletariat. Tools, techniques, machines, they are the part of means of production. This is basically the materialistic, historical materialism. And once you have done it, then through this you will also be able to reflect the dynamics of change through either the dialectical materialism or historical materialism. It is basically a classless society. Man was not the producer, it was the consumer. Man was dependent on the nature. Everything was on nature, owned by everyone. Whosoever provided the labor received the fruit of his labor. But man was also the part of the extension of community. If somebody has produced more than his need, then it is used by others. The perspective of exchange in a Marxian theory will start coming from there. I love one line in anthropology, that what is the best way to keep the surplus? When you do not have to store it. So in the primitive societies, what is the best way to keep the surplus? The best way to keep the surplus to put in the stomachs of relatives. The objects of nature were owned by none. But the increase in population basically made the people in a groups to move here and there. And they try to restrict the use of that nature where surrounding them. But further increase in population has left with no choice but to assert some, to attack. And that way we will find about that how those who won became the masters, those who lost become the slaves. Slaves were put to the process of production. The ruler and the ruled kind of perspective that you might have gone through will start coming from there. and class will become the base of a stratification. From the undifferentiated horde, we are moving to the stratified classes of people. But when somewhere the tentative political dimension started emerging out, all this victorious one, they invested the power in one hand, and this territory was divided into certain zones, and these zones were given in the hands of the lords, on which the cultivation was to be done by the serf. New technological advancement came out. When the factory system started emerging out, the three primary classes started emerging out, three primary actors started emerging out. Owner of the land, owner of the capital who was invested and opened the factory, and owner of the labor. But in this process of production, the two primary classes are the owner of capital, that is the bourgeois, and the owner of labor, that is proletariat, and within which we find about this one. Capitalism with the last antagonistic modes of production. With the proletariat revolution, the capitalism would be overthrown. And in this transition, the transitory phase would be socialism. And gradually, communism would be inaugurated. So from here, we are moving to socialism and communism, communal ownership of production. No class, and ultimately there will be no state. So that way, the Marxian perspective, that evolution that we find about from there. What makes history move is the dialectics. And here, the dialectical perspective are witnessed by us. The materialistic dimension is witnessed by us. Once one type of need is fulfilled, another type of needs comes out. And once again, to satisfy the needs, we will be having establishing link with the tools, techniques, forces of production, and on the other hand, with the relations of production. With other people. And that way, we will be talking about that modes of production in these terms of this one. And in this very perspective, the very concept of class struggle will emerge out. When I said proletariat revolution, the class struggle will come out. Marx is basically not only providing the materialistic interpretation of history, but also providing the ways to transform it. Thus his theory seems to be scientific, he is called scientific. Not only providing that materialistic condition, interpreting the history in a materialistic dimension, but also providing the ways to transform it. Philosophers have always talked of change. This is now time to change the society. And Marx does not believe in a fatalistic writing in history. That the French historians or someone who has talked about the fatalistic interpretation of history, Marx rejects that one. What makes history move? It is the class struggle that will make history move. The dialectics has made history move. Man has always, or all human beings, are creative agencies, striving towards self-fulfillment. And history is a continuous struggle for a dominance among groups. All production for self-fulfillment are basically the appreciation of nature. In other words, in the course of history, man increasingly transforms nature to serve its purposes. But in the process, they also transform themselves. A struggle against nature for livelihood through associated labor makes man to create a specific mode of production with a specific social organization. Thus, one form of modes of production seems to be different from another form of modes of production. Except primitive communism, all modes of production are characterized by social inequality. As society evolved from unstratified horde to the emergence of a stratification of men, which became possible through division of labor, in which all stratified classes were distinguished by their differential access to modes of production. And thus, to explain this, Marx brings the concept of dialectics, the methodological base of the Marxian theory. And I said that it will be borrowed from Hegel. And how the dialectics is based on the principle of negation, which requires mind to go beyond all forms of consciousness. It also makes the mind to understand what the old form is imperfect, less satisfactory than the newer form. It means dialectics is forcing us to become aware of everything which is changeable and transitory in nature. Historical process consists of some temporary stages containing contradictions, and every stage is surrounded by the new movement that negates it, transforms it, progresses beyond it, yet possesses its particular characteristics. And this process could be understood in terms of thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which could also be read in terms of being, not being, becoming. And sometimes you can also use the word affirmation, negation, and negation of negation. And dialectics will involve the three laws, that in terms of transformation from quality to quantity, quantity to quality, number one. Number two, the law of union of opposites. And number three, the law of negation of negation. However, in this dialectics, which seems to be a very powerful method to analyze social transformation, Hegel gives primacy to idea. Marx gives primacy to materialism. That if you want to render the truth, it is not the idealistic kernel, but the materialistic kernel will yield you the truth. And thus I quote about that what is the prime concern in history, a writing of all history, and from there the materialistic or historical materialism, materialistic interpretation of history will emerge out, which we are popularly calling at historical materialism. And once you have talked about historical materialism, this outline will come out, and in this outline modes of production will come out, and this modes of production will be talking about in terms of changes from one stage to another. And in this very perspective, you need to talk about the changing modes of production. And once we have talked about this one, we will be talking about that in that infrastructure, superstructure. And that way, the Marxian perspective would be coming out. If I quote one line, that in the process of dialectics, the established order is a thesis, which inevitably produces its own antithesis in the form of new modes of production. As a result of some new inventions and discoveries, the produced forces come in conflict with the existing relations of production. They become fetters for one another, and consequently a new revolutionary class emerges that throws away the existing order in a violent revolution. The old order gives way to the new order, though some elements of previous order are retained. For example, enslaved society was replaced by feudal society, which was replaced by capitalist society, and which would be replaced by socialist society, which will ultimately inaugurate communist society. The logic of dialectics underlines that every stage of social development falls short of perfection, thus containing the seeds of its own destruction. There is an imperfectibility marked by division of labor into dominant and deprived, which gets doomed due to the interplay of internal contradictions. Now once you have done this one, then talk about this. The modes of production will come out. And once we have talked about this one, then we will be talking about the capitalist kind of perspective. I gave you a certain perspective. That how the evolution would look from the primitive communism to the slave society, to the feudal society, to the capitalist society. And when we are talking about the capitalism, we find about how the forces of capitalism heralded a new era of progress by negating the feudal system and emerged as a unique historical development. In this sense, capitalism can be quoted as negation of negation, because it negated feudal society, which had negated the ancient society. Capitalism reflects the relationship between bourgeois and the proletariat, manifesting the law of unity and the struggle between opposites. It emerged as a market-centric economy in which the system of production for completely different form, different from the previous stage, happened. Marx says that it is the natural instinct of the man which makes him to engage in the process of production. However, in capitalism, there is a question in terms of fetishism of commodity. However, in capitalism, the fetishism of commodity has emerged out. Man worships commodity and money, becomes enslaved of it. In labor, man produces commodity. Earlier, the commodities were produced for the personal need or for the need of someone who was close to, which reflected only the use value, necessary value. But capitalism has transformed commodity from a use value to the exchange value. However, on the very face of the creator, the commodity has separated the exchange value from the need of the creator, manifesting its own independent existence, implying that commodity has acquired a mystical external existence, that has taken life of its own. The worker is separated from the product, and the labor has turned into a commodity, commodification of labor. The labor has gone out of the hands of the laborer and has turned to an object existing independently as a power of its own, confronting its own creator. In other words, as an object, it confronts the laborer as an external, independent, hostile and alien, thereby acquiring a fetish character. So this way the fetishism of commodity will come out. Now when the fetishism of commodity which I picked up, that this fetishism of commodity and money has become so strong that it has guided man to engage in the process of production, thereby making the relationship between bourgeois and a proletariat, that is, honor of capital and honor of labor, inevitable. However, in the capitalism, goods and services are produced for sale by means of an open market, and both at the point of production and also at the point of consumption, commodities are evaluated in terms of their usefulness. But the commodities, I've just said, commodities are not produced for the interest of fulfilling subjective needs. Rather, subjectivity is manifested to accommodate production and profit. Mind the line, beta. Thus, capitalism has destroyed the personal relationship, has replaced the ties of personal social relationship with that of mutual indifference, thereby destroying the traditional dependence among human beings. It has also changed, transformed the relations between man and a woman. in a pre-capitalist stage, the humans were inclined towards one another for the maintenance and sustenance of social relationship, but it has been destroyed by capitalism. Even the relations between man and woman, this question was there. Even the relation between man and woman has been destroyed. Individuals do not recognize one another, rather see oneself as autonomous, determining, but truth is that he fails to understand or perceive the actual reality that reflects false consciousness. In capitalism, the commodification of labor has emerged. Labor has turned to a commodity, implying that like any other commodity, labor could be bought and sold in a market. In labor, the laborer will produce surplus. And the labor has now got a value. And within which we will be talking about law of motion of capital, MCM1. Money invested, commodity produced, commodity sold at a market, in which M1, law of each M1 would be greater than M. Now if we quote one line, what is capitalism? Can I say that capitalism can also be viewed as a social relationship between the owner of capital and owner of labor, when each movement may seem to be commodity, may seem to be capital, may seem to be factory and any other thing, but all along its journey, it is basically endowed with the one quality, that is to increase the value that has gone into it. And who is increasing that value? That value is being increased by the worker. So the money invested, there is a law of motion of capital to earn profit. Money invested, commodity produced, commodity sold in a market, that is M1 is greater than M. This is law of motion of capital. But there is also the law of reducing the circulation of capital. In a very simple sentence, reducing the circulation of capital is that money invested returning back in the hands of the capitalist. So what will be done? New transportation system, banking, financial institutions, credit system that will come out. That are reducing the time span of the circulation of capital would be curtailed. What the time it was taking in terms of investment and coming back to the money, that time span would be reduced. But in this whole process, capitalism is also an imperfect stage, reflecting its own seeds of contradictions, own seeds of nemesis. So some contradictions will start emerging out. And when we are talking about these contradictions, problem of realizing surplus value, because the live labor would be replaced by the machines. Machines can only increase the value that has gone into it. Surplus value could be created only by the worker. Crisis of overproduction, competition among the capitalists. We will be talking about inverse of the demands and price. The law of falling tendency to the rate of profit. And then ultimately the socio-political conditions for the emergence of proletariat as a class, in which the workers first oppose machines, then they will oppose individual capitalists, and then ultimately capitalism system would be opposed and overthrown, in which class struggle will become instrumental. But in this very process of production, man is not there for the satisfaction of the self-need. Man is also working for the satisfaction of the needs of those who are dependent on it. But this very creativity is destroyed. If I could quote one line, that even if the very bad architect, poor architect, is better than a bee which is making the net, That is instinctive. But even if the poor architect is there, he has first planned it, he has first created it. There is a creativity. What separates man from the other animals, other species, is his creativity. But in the process of production, that creativity is lost. The worker is not there going to satisfy his creativity. He is only going there to work that he could sustain. He has become a commodity. He is a part of clog in a system. So animal turns to a man, man turns to an animal. And particularly within this process, Marx will be picking up at another concept from where the question comes out, is called alienation. Time and again I am saying that we will be talking about in brief. Because what in a foundational course which you do in a 5 or 6 months, we will be talking about in 1.5 hours, the entire perspective. But this is basically to rebrush that one. In the Marxian concept, analysis of capitalism and modes of production, concept of alienation emerges as one of the most important phenomena and reality, reflecting the socio-economic consequences of capitalism. Political and philosophical manuscripts interprets alienation, which brings Marx very close to the sociological analysis. Let me say that alienation is not only manifesting consequences, but it is also reflecting, expressing the production activity associated with the capitalist modes of production. It literally means estrangement, separation from the things that belong to someone. Alienation is the experience of oneself as alien and become mechanical in the process of production, thereby reflecting a state of mind in response to materialistic system in which the work is reduced to mere labor. This question was asked. Try to find out that, I said it, try to understand that from where the concept has come. Try to provide the locations in which the work is mere reduced to labor, in which one does not develop the mental and physical ability freely, rather one mortifies one's body and mind. But Marx has said that alienation is not peculiar to industrial capitalism, since neither the slave nor the serf owned the modes of production. But in capitalism, the common condition of life has changed drastically, and particularly the condition of workers. Capitalism, which has emerged as the market-centric economy, has made man to relate himself with the process of production, in which the social structure of modern capitalist society seems to center around fetishism of commodity. And I just talked about the fetishism of commodity and money, which man worships and becomes enslaved of it. So you pick up the concept of fetishism of commodity. Broadly, conceptually looking at in a Marxian perspective, the perspective of alienation, two propositions seems to be more important. One taken from the Hegel, that is labor is man's species being. However, Marx adds another proposition that is called labor is performed as wage labor. Before Marx, Hegel, Ludwig Feuerbach, a sense of Christianity in terms of from where the certain impact on Marx would be witnessed. So religion, but Marx is neither talking about the Hegel's metaphysical perspective, nor he is basically going with the religious interpretation what the Ludwig Feuerbach has done. Marx is basically looking at the materialistic condition in the modes of production, capitalist modes of production. And then Marx is providing the explanation which is different from his predecessor, that is Hegel and the Ludwig Feuerbach. That's why Marx is neither interpreting alienation from the perspective of metaphysical, what Hegel has done, and nor from the religious perspective, what Ludwig Feuerbach has done. Marx is viewing alienation on the basis of human existence, that is labor. Marx is also disagreeing with economics, who consider private property as natural. Marx says even wage is not natural because it has turned into a commodity, thereby alienating the laborer from labor, implying that creator is alienated from his own creation. Where the creator exists independently, confronting the creator on his own face, that way the fetishism of commodity will be coming out. It is the creativity that separates man from other species. But this creativity has disappeared in the wage labor. When you say this creativity has disappeared in the wage labor, then man has basically turned into an animal. What has separated man from the animal? The creativity. But as the wage labor, this creativity is gone. Man is nothing but the animal. Man has turned to an animal, animal has turned to a man. Since when the worker is working, he is not a man. And when he is not working, he tries to realize himself as a man. But ironically indulges in the activities like sleeping, eating, drinking, procreating, the functions of the animal. And in this very process, Marx is broadly outlining the four forms of alienation. From the process of production, number one. Number two, from the product he produces. Number three, from the community fellow men or humanity. And number four, from himself. Though Marx is, now this is the four which in alienation comes out, we talk about this one. Process, product, community or humanity, and from himself. But Marx is very optimistic that this condition of alienation would be rectified through class struggle. I just said that class struggle would be the moving force of history. Class struggle is basically a corollary. Corollary means supplementary. Supplementary to historical materialism. I'll just take 2 minutes and I'll begin that one. The course which we used to finish in 22 hours, the marks, that kind. We are basically picking up the certain important nuances which will help you not only to recall back, but also some of the new data, some new interpretation, and that way some added marks would be there. Anyone whosoever has gone through Marx, or whatever we have talked about up to here, somehow or other, the very concept of class struggle that becomes the most important one. It's now time to change. What makes history move? It is not the fatalistic interpretation that has made history to move. History is the make of man. So if any rectification is required, it is the man who has to take the action, within which the class struggle will emerge as a moving force of history. It will also become a means of emancipation of mankind. But I say that when talking about the class struggle, the very analysis of class struggle brings, along with alienation, brings Marx very close to the doors of sociology. And in this very perspective of class struggle, I said that you need to basically look at class struggle as a corollary of historical materialism. In a Marxian theory, even that we will be going through in Unit 5, the classes are the principal actors of historical drama of human history in general and capitalism in particular. Marxian theory of class can be interpreted on the basis of the three factors. The existence of class is concerned with a certain historical phases in the process of production. Number two, the class struggle in capitalism would lead to dictatorship of proletariat, a transitory phase. And number three, dictatorship of proletariat is merely a transitory phase in evolution of class and evolution of classless society. That is number three. In a Marxian analysis, the development of class is on the basis of relations of production and respective sources of income, that is, property relations. However, this relationship also reveals that classes have different interests and the class is irreconcilable category, thereby making class struggle inevitable. In the capitalist society, the three principal actors, the owner of land, the owner of capital, and the owner of labor, they basically live by the three different sources of income. The owner of land will live by rent, owner of capital by profit, and owner of labor by wages. However, mind the line. But for Marx, a class to be a social class, there must be consciousness of unity, a feeling of separation from other classes that would be developed only through class struggle. Thus Marx writes, Marx emphasizes that the entire history of mankind is hitherto the history of class struggle. It has always taken place in course of human history between free men and slaves, plebeians and patricians, between lords and serfs, who have always carried out, sometimes hidden, now open fight, and each time ending either in ruins of classes or revolutionary reconstruction of society. In capitalism, the contradictions have emerged between the two principal actors related to the modes of production, that is the bourgeois and the proletariat, which in the course of history will become more simple and strong. And why more simple and strong? Because every group of society will find their locations in either sides. Society would be broken into two more and more hostile camps. The bourgeois society that has developed on the ruins of feudal society has not been able to get rid of the class antagonism. It has its own contradictions. It has established the classes which with the new form of exploitation and struggle has taken a new turn. And whenever the class in the course of its development realizes its subjectivity, the path of class struggle is paved in, within which class consciousness is the most important one. And when you talk about the class consciousness, simply it's a transition from class in itself to class for itself. Let me pick up the two dimensions from where the certain questions, and I also consider these questions were the best. Subjective understanding of the objective reality prepared the text of a class struggle. Such kind of questions have come out. Then you need to remember the first line which says that in the course of history human development will take place only when the class realizes its subjectivity. But this subjectivity is basically developing on the objective criterion. The belief in class struggle is the essence of history. That vitiates the proletariat attitude, proletariat thinking, and also making them realize their revolutionary role in the change of the system. When I say objective criterion, so economic objective criterion on which the class can be looked at. Now within which this subjective consciousness is emerging out. The subjectivity is emerging. That's why I said this subjectivity develops on the objective criteria. And class consciousness is merely, simply a transition from class in itself to class for itself. A class would become a class for itself through class struggle by realizing its objectivity and interest. Since historical laws of social development are determined by means of man's action and will. Therefore, the class consciousness is the essence, subjective essence. And through the class consciousness, a class becomes aware of its potentiality, realizes its class position in relation to the other class. When we talk about the class in itself is merely an aggregate of workers having a common class position, reflecting a state of false consciousness, where they have failed to perceive, to realize their potential nature of their interest. But the transition from the false consciousness to true consciousness would ignite the class to relate its potentiality to bring change. And thus the transition would take place from class in itself to class for itself. The transition would also manifest the subjective understanding of the objective reality, which will prepare the path of the class struggle. Marx is also moving away from Hegel. His followers, the way they have given primacy to idealism, that consciousness determines the being. Marx says, no, it is not the consciousness that determines the being. It is the being that determines the consciousness. Now look at it in the same class consciousness. This question has also been asked to you. It's not the consciousness that determines the beings. Rather, it is the being that determines the consciousness. Since materialistic existence is the prime concern in history, and every idea is the product of social idea, and not the reverse. Those who have focused on or have given primacy to the idea have not understood the complete reality of existence. Man is born into objective class position. I repeat, man is born in objective class position, implying that one's existence is objective, within which develops consciousness, subjectivity, which happens when the transition takes place from class in itself to class for itself. Marx in his analysis of the class struggle is saying, now the conflict has entered to a decisive phase. All the classes that stand face to face with bourgeois, proletariat is the only revolutionary class. Other classes will wither and ultimately disappear. But proletariat is a special and important product. So the class struggle will begin with importance of property, pauperization of proletariat, exploitation, development of proletariat, class consciousness, process of proletarization, and ultimately class struggle, which would give way to socialist modes of production, and ultimately communism would be inaugurated. In socialism, the social structure that develops after overthrowing social capitalism. The dictatorship of proletariat begins. But if this dictatorship of proletariat is a transitory phase, means of production comes under social ownership. Labor is made compulsory for all able-bodied persons. Attention also shifts towards development of science and technology, so to create a condition where all social needs could be fulfilled. At this stage, rights are determined according to the rule, that is, each according to ability, each according to work. Now Marx is going further from here and is saying that by force proletariat would succeed in inaugurating communism, class would disappear, difference between mental and physical labor will disappear, no one will have exclusive rights. Communism is the final stage of society that would emerge from working socialism in a longer time, and ultimately will move towards classless, stateless society. Public power will lose political character, and ultimately a state will wither away. And how the rights will be determined? Rights will be determined by the rule, that is, each according to ability, each according to need. And Marx is also saying that if you look at most of the revolutions in the course of history, it has been initiated by the minorities for the benefit of minority. The proletariat revolution is the only revolution which is initiated by the majority for the benefit of majority. Revolution is a historical necessity, and it is indispensable midwife to the social change. You could imagine a question from there. It is an effective means to transfer power and bring a new epoch. Proletariat revolution will lead to production into centralized system in the vast association of the whole nation. Marx in his Communist Manifesto thus will be talking about that how workers of the world be united, you have nothing to lose except the chain of slavery, but you have the entire world to conquer. Thus once again I am saying, either you are talking about modes of production, or you talk about alienation, or you talk about a class struggle. The Marxian methodology of dialectical materialism or historical interpretation of history, that conceptual clarity has to be important, has to be there with you. And everywhere, all it seems to be interrelated with one another. Now in the class struggle, you can also talk about an outline. Now make a tabular kind of perspectives. That historical epoch, prevailing modes of production, cause of class struggle, social formation, and the contending classes on the top. Now for example, the historical epoch is a slave society, and prevailing modes of production is household based small scale production. Emergence of private property is the causes of class struggle. Social formation is social slave society, ancient one, and the contending classes are masters and the slaves. Slaves in a medieval society, large scale agricultural based production would be the prevailing modes of production. The causes of class struggle will be rise of feudalism, social formation would be feudal society, and the contending classes will be lord and the serfs. And when we talk about the modern society, we are talking about the capitalism. Large scale machine based production would be the prevailing modes of production. Rise of capitalism would be the cause of social struggle or class struggle. Social formation is capitalist bourgeois society, and then contending classes would be bourgeois and the proletariat. And we talk about the future one, that is the socialist society. The prevailing modes of production would be large scale machine based production. Socialist revolution would emerge out. Socialist society would be the social formation. Workers in power and former capitalist. But ultimately when you come to the future too, that we are talking about the communist one, the same large scale machine based production, no class. It will be social formation with the communist society and the classless society. So if I give this one, what I was talking about, if I write it down so that you can add in your notes and try to interpret that one. Make like this. All right. Historical epoch. Prevailing modes of production. Causes of class struggle. Social formation. And the last, contending classes. Begin with the 5. Here you talk about the slave society, feudal society, capitalist society, future 1 and future 2. Here in the prevailing modes of production is the household based small scale production. Causes of class struggle is emergence of private property. Social formation is slave society, master and the slaves. In a feudal one we are talking about, it is basically large scale agricultural based production. And there you talk about rise of feudalism, feudal society, lord and the serfs. And when you talk about the capitalist, you talk about large scale machine based production, rise of capitalism is the prevailing modes of production. Alright? Capitalist bourgeois society, rise of capitalism would be there. And then capitalist bourgeois society would be the social formation, and the contending classes is bourgeois and the proletariat. And here you talk about in the contending classes in socialist society, the worker in for power and farmer capitalist. Once you have done this one, go for the basic criticism of the Marxism. Pick up all one by one. But let me say it, that do not quote the wrong scholar. Sometimes you have forgotten the scholar, just go through, quote in your one word. If you remember 1 or 2, this is fine. But sometimes in the questions that how he was different from the predecessors, how the successors have come out, in which you need to know 1 or 2 scholars, and that way the things will be there. But once again I am saying that criticize analytically, and once you have criticized, just give one last paragraph on which we will be talking about the relevance, the essence, the evaluation. The economic determinism to the dialectical, how he has talked about the negative aspect. Remandara, that how he does not provide the clear-cut definition of class. Ralph Dahrendorf, the neo-Marxist, Sorokin in terms of revolution. You pick up, there are numerous through which the criticism of Marx would be picked up. But your focus should be on the theme that is written in the syllabus. Every theme would be involving certain kind of concepts. And the methodology is dialectical materialism or historical interpretation of materialistic interpretation of history, which are calling as historical materialism. And in this very perspective, now once you have done it, once you have listened the video, you have added some of the points in your old notes. Then now look at the questions. Sit down with the questions and try to ask yourself that if this question comes out, what are the points which I am going to write? And same perspective would be picked up in every dimension here. That you give 1 hour at least to know the socio-historical conditions. And the socio-historical conditions will basically be making you that how every scholar, every sociologist which are there in the syllabus are part and parcel of their society. They are the product of their own time. They are product of their social condition. The social, economic, political, these developments which is taking place. They would be providing certain kind of impetus, they are providing certain kind of material within which the thinker's thought will develop, will emerge. And once you have done this one, and particularly when you have done all the 6 thinkers, I will be talking about that one later on, I will finish. Talk about the comparative analysis, either in terms of methodology or in terms of the certain kind of things which seems to be very similar in all these scholars. So from here, I will be picking up division of Emile Durkheim, the second scholar. I will give you 2 minutes break. The purpose of this advanced course or crash course is basically not only to make you develop the concepts, but also to revise your old perspectives, because you have a very less time. And once by watching it, everything will start, you start recalling back. The certain new dimensions will be coming out, which will be added. And that way you seem to be prepared once you have watched that one. And you watch it in your convenience, but once you watch it in one go. And then think it. Sometimes slow it down so that you can jot down 1 or 2 lines, 2 points, and that will be going on. Now here we are talking about, just after this I will be talking about Emile Durkheim. The same perspective here. Today we will be talking about impact of, you might have gone through, but I am just giving you the outline, impact of French and non-French scholars. And particularly in Durkheim. Inspiration from Auguste Comte, and more precisely is the hierarchy of science. And then combating all those who have initiated individualistic analysis. It will include Adam Smith as well. And with combating this, those who have given focus on the individualistic orientation, Durkheim would be more concerned of supra-individual. You remember this word? Supra-individual forces and conditions. And then the last one, transcendental reality of society. And once we have done this one, then methodology would be coming out. A specific subject matter, distinct methodology, rules of sociological method, that is the book, 1895. And from there, division of labor, entry of Durkheim to sociology, 1893. And then we will be talking about suicide and sociology of religion, that is elementary forms of religious life. But once you do it, then you never forget to evaluate. Every scholar. Now this is the passing which we are talking about, that how the thinkers have emerged out. And in this very perspective, I many times always say that though the foundation of sociology has been laid down by Auguste Comte, the French scholar, and the sociology which was baptized was freed with the theoretical dimensions by Herbert Spencer, but somehow or other, Durkheim's life is combating all those who have not taken sociology seriously. And in this attempt, he will not only provide what the specific subject matter of sociology would be there, but the sociology which was accused of that it does not have any specific subject matter, it does not have a distinct methodology, that would be answered, that would be addressed by Emile Durkheim in sociology. So the first part we will be talking about is the methodology, and these are the themes. And in this very perspective, the Marxian analysis, the Durkheim's analysis, that has to be talked by us. I'll just take 2 minutes and I will begin that one. When we're talking about Emile Durkheim till date remains to be one of the most important thinker in the sociological tradition, and considered to be one of the founding fathers of modern sociology. His works on the different facets of the society still reflect an enduring significance in the contemporary sociological tradition. His ideas, methods, concepts, and orientation to understand society at the very nascent phase, early development, is a treasure to us, which is not only inspiring the contemporary sociologist, but is also posing certain kind of challenges in terms of studying society objectively. Frank Parkin, who has written extensively on Durkheim, and he said the sociologist continues to focus on the question that Durkheim raised and plundered the Aladdin's cave of concept that he bequeathed. Durkheim became interested in sociology, but somehow or other he is mourning the fact that the sociology, which is a French in origin, has become a German science. And in this very perspective, the Durkheim's contribution to sociology, that has to be analyzed, evaluated by us. The phases through which the French society has passed or is passing through, It has a deep impact on a milder kind, and which would also be having the certain kind of foundational base in the theoretical methodological development of Durkheim's sociology. The conditions, the happenings, the procedures prevalent at his time, like every other scholars, like every other philosophers, has its impact on the Durkheim's theoretical methodological dimension as well. However, I always said that the kind of sociology which we are understanding today and the kind of sociology that the contemporary sociologists are practicing and teaching, that seems to be much more easier when compared to the time when Durkheim's sociology was building up. And why I am saying so? That Durkheim is basically pained to establish sociology as a scientific study of society. At the time when the humanities, philosophies, they have established themselves, they are studying the different aspects of society, then Durkheim would basically be talking about how sociology is different from them. That the different branches of social science studies what is happening in society, sociology studies the society per se. And that way, he would not only be initiating the course of, the newer course of sociology, in which he will agree with some, he will disagree with some. Right from Takwa Valley to others. They are not necessary here in terms of the advanced classes. So this impact of the scholars he will be looking at. With some he will be agreeing, with some he will not be agreeing, and he will be moving away from there. And he would basically be moving away from all those who have somehow or other provided the individualistic orientation of the society. But let me say that one of the particular inspiration to Durkheim would be basically Auguste Comte, the predecessor of Durkheim. And Auguste Comte in the Hierarchy of Sciences, with this, Durkheim will pick up that how sociology studies a particular objective reality. Sciences are hierarchically structured into different levels of organization, where each level is governed from astronomy, physics, chemistry, biology. This hierarchy of sciences I am talking about, where each level is governed by its own specific rule and laws. Thus, in the Comtean hierarchy of sciences, the beginning is from astronomy to physics, even mathematics will come up, to physics, to chemistry, to biology, to sociology, where biology is higher than physics but lower than sociology in hierarchy, implying that social reality is distinct from physical and biological reality. I repeat the line, that social reality is distinct from physical and biological reality. And therefore, the explanation of social reality cannot be reduced to the laws of other sciences. In this background, Durkheim would basically be talking about what sociology should study and how it should study. In this very perspective, the two prime concerns will be emerging out in Durkheim sociology. Priority of society over individual, and the idea, second one, the idea that society could be studied scientifically. And in this process of studying society scientifically, Durkheim will move toward positivism. And he will try to define all those necessary conditions for a stable and a smooth functioning of society, which would help sociologists to formulate scientific solutions to most of the pressing problems of modern times. When I say Durkheim is focusing on the supra-individual forces and conditions, then it is making him move away from all those individualistic explanations. I said even including Gabriel Tard, which we will be talking about in Law of Imitation, to the Adam Smith, to the Wheeler, others, those are demographers. And Durkheim is basically looking at all those theories which have basically provided individualistic orientation. Such theories usually claim that social process, conditions, structures solely result from individual and interactions between them. But to Durkheim, social conditions and the structure can't be explained in terms of quality and psychological characteristics of individual. He also objects the explanations which tries to explain the functioning of modern society on the basis of contract freely concluded by the individuals. Durkheim says that contract between individuals is taking place in a modern society. But this contract between the individuals is based on social and collective conditions. And when it says social and collective conditions, Durkheim is now moving away from individualistic to supra-individual social condition and forces, and he is looking at non-contextual foundation of a contract. I repeat, he is basically looking at non-contextual foundation of a contract. It means Durkheim's focus is more on the social process and the patterns which are more than individual. And that's why I say transcendental reality of society, transcendental explanation of society. And if it is more than individual, then the focus is now shifting to the same supra-individual forces and conditions. It is also implying, mind the line beta, it is also implying this fact that sociology, sociology is based on reality beyond psychology. Since the reality of society is more than and morally superior to the individual or individual's psychological makeup. It means, what does it mean? It means at the core of Durkheim sociology lies the fact that society is a real phenomena with unique properties. And to express this, Durkheim is using the Latin sui generis. More or less many times we write all of it, so no, don't go through this one. This Latin sui generis what Durkheim is using, that implies that as a reality, the existence and operation, TION, operation of society cannot be reduced to individuals' actions and motives. The reality of society is beyond individual. And if the reality of society is beyond individual, then sociology should be independent of psychology, and for that matter, any other field of social sciences. This is the transcendental analysis of society. And to understand this, Durkheim is now laying down the methodological concerns in sociologically, the rules of sociological method. And that way you will be able to understand the methodology in science. I said that the two prime concerns the specific subject matter and distinct methodology. And with this, he will be trying to establish sociology as an empirical study of society. He argues that too much weightage has been given to philosophy, humanities. Thus, in his article, Sociology in its Scientific Field, Durkheim asserts that history, politics, economics, aesthetics, demography, psychology, all study what happens in society, not the society per se. And if not the society per se, it means now sociology seems to be different from these other fields, the other branches. And thus, in this attempt of empirical study of society, he will be basically looking at the procedures which would help him establish general supra-individual laws, structures, functional connections, and thus he would be coming very close to positivistic methodology. Now, as a discipline, what sociologists should study? Sociology ought to study only shared collective social facts in the searchful chain of causality and functionality. And for this searchful chain of causality and functionality, Durkheim is now disapproving the perceptions and motives of individual actions. And once again, even when the moment he will be disapproving the individual psychological predisposition, the sui generis reality in Durkheim's analysis will become important. In a very passing reference to make you understand that prior to it was argued that sociology does not have a specific subject matter, sociology does not have a distinct methodology, it does not have a method of inquiry. It was also argued that social phenomena can be studied by the psychological perspective, since social behavior is not distinct from the individual's behavior. However, Durkheim is arguing that psychological, mind the line beta, psychological causes are merely the manifestation of social causes, and the social facts are the cause of social behavior. Hence, sociologists are required to study the social facts, which are objective facts. Therefore, they are required to be studied objectively and should be approached like the natural science. Should be approached as the natural scientists are approaching the natural objects. It means, as the natural scientists are discovering natural laws to study the natural phenomena, sociologists also need to discover and establish social laws to understand social phenomena, for which sociologists are required to discover objective social facts, which could be found in the social institutions. And this objective reality is sui generis. It means, as an objective reality, it is away from individuals within it. It could be sum total of individual, but it is more than it. Society is real. But let me not forget it. Those Durkheim considers society to be real, but as a matter of fact, it is intangible, lacking a physical form. Thus, the constraining forces emerging out of it are difficult to measure. But despite this limitation, Durkheim is arguing that even if social cannot be seen, it must be measured if sociology needs to develop as a science, for which Durkheim moves towards indicators like his historical indicators will be using in division of labor, a statistical indicator which will be using in society, an ethnographic indicator which will be using in religion. Historical indicator, division of labor, a statistical indicator, society, ethnographic indicator, sociology of religion. Durkheim is saying that these indicators are not arbitrarily constructed, rather they are real, and since they are real, they must be discovered, for which sociologists should try to look for causal significance, cause and effects, from the perspective of reality of society itself. Social facts are happening in society, and the social reality is not amenable to biological or psychological reality. Thus it has its own laws, it has its own rules, in which we will be focusing about the causal significance. And that causal significance from the perspective of reality of society itself. And as a reality, as a sui generis. I have given the two meanings of this one. It means as a fact. This reality is irreducible in origin and operation of individual acts. It is also implying the fact that as a reality, it cannot be explained from the perspective of actions and motives of individual. If it cannot be explained from the perspectives of actions and motives of individuals, then social facts are to be viewed from outside rather than from inside. It should not be based on, it should not be analyzed on the individual's subjective psychological predisposition. And if it has not to be explained by the individual subjective psychological predisposition, what sociologists are required to do? They are required to discard the preconceptions, lack of clarity, prejudices, and thus the central theme in Durkheim's analysis will emerge as a social fact. Look at the line, I am giving something. Social facts are those collective ways of thinking, feeling and doing, which though comes through individual, but are external to him and are endowed with a coercive power. And here you remember only three words, ECG, electrocardiogram. E for external, C for constraint, G for generality. Generality would basically be divided into normal and pathological. External in terms of outside, constraint, C for constraint. So you remember the word ECG. Sometimes they ask you such kind of questions. So all those facts which display these characteristics would be called the social facts. Not all facts are social facts. Such kind of questions have been asked to you. And once you have defined the social facts are to be viewed as a thing. As a thing from an outside mind. And independent of individual. When you say independent of individual, it also implies that social facts have their own independent existence, containing within themselves social order, laws, causal connections and functional relations. And thus you divide that in terms of material, non-material and social current. Since social facts innate in society, emanate in society, and thus we need a science of society or science of social facts to study it, whose reality and objectivity cannot be reduced to the subjective actions and motives of individual. Preconceptions must be eradicated. These are the primary rules he is laying down. Every sociological investigation must begin with a study of social facts as a sui generis reality. Sociologists must establish a causal connectivity to determine how to study and what principle to follow. The explanation of social facts must separately follow sufficient causal and functional analysis. And the explanation of social facts must be sought within society itself to study it scientifically. So in the methodology, the discovery of this or establishment of these social laws, akin to that of the natural science, is the prime concern in Durkheim's methodology. Though he realizes that like natural science, sociology is not in a privileged condition to go for the direct experimentation. And thus, Durkheim moves towards comparative method, indirect experimentation, within which comparative method is indirect experimentation, within which the comparative method will become important. Comparative method, according to Durkheim, is the essence of sociology. However, the essence is not to know the society is in a hierarchical order. Rather, the essence is to go for causation. This homogenization, this causation would be provided by the comparative method. Why the two cultures are similar, why the two cultures are different, requires causality. For example, the division of labor will come out. Why mechanical solidarity? Societies with mechanical solidarities seems to be different from that of the societies of the organic solidarity. It is not only so that you say that social evolution has taken place. As a thing, you will be able to delineate the certain characteristics. On the basis of this, you would be able to provide the causal that why on this ground it seems the societies of mechanical solidarity seems to be different from the societies of the organic solidarity. And that way, Durkheim says comparative method is not a method, it is a sociology in itself. That the principle that the single cause always has a single corresponding cause effect, that will be provided by the comparative method. And in this very perspective, Durkheim's methodology would be addressing the causal explanation. But not merely the causal explanation, but he will also be talking about the functional analysis. But he does not believe in a simple explanation. What is the function of the heart? To purify the blood, send it to the arteries and veins, whatever we eat turns to the blood, blood comes to and it is purified, sent to the different arteries and veins. No. Mind the word. In the functional analysis, Durkheim is talking about the concept that is called self-regulating system. Whatever we will eat will turn to blood. Blood will come to the heart. Heart will purify it, pump it, purify it, send to the arteries and veins. So this functional analysis of Durkheim has to be viewed in terms of self-regulatory system. And within which Durkheim will provide the organistic explanation comparing social organism with the biological organism. Function will refer to the correspondence between facts under consideration and general need of social orientation. The function of social fact is to produce socially useful effects. The function of heart is to purify and pump the blood and send it to arteries and veins. In a self-regulating system, simply family, religion, laws, division of labor, education, all have a function in self-regulatory manner, contributing to the maintenance of the whole, that is a social society as a whole. Durkheim's treatment of social fact in his methodology is also laying down the certain features, that is external, constant and generality. I told you ACG. Where the G, generality, will be further divided into normal and pathological. When social facts are analyzed and viewed from outside mind, independently, without being reduced to individual psychological predisposition, it reflects externality. And when Durkheim focuses on supra-individual forces, which have the power to coerce individual, where the perspective of constraints can be viewed in terms of number of people, moral normative, and the cultural cognitive constraint. But Durkheim is saying this constraint is not unfortunate. They are not to be viewed as an unfortunate restraint on individual's freedom, individual's mind. Rather, these constraints are the base of social order, with which society would be maintaining that order. But if this is not there, society would be more than a chaotic struggle, not more than a chaotic struggle between individuals. The selfish individuals. And Durkheim divides generality into normal and pathological. And he uses the medical metaphor, that is, normal and pathological. By using this medical metaphor, he equates normal with usual, usual with healthy, pathological with unusual, and unusual with unhealthy. Though we need to remember that in a normal society, some pathological facts would be found. They may be present in a normal society. Pathological facts may be present in normal society. And to a certain extent they would be tolerated. But Durkheim is insisting that as a sociologist our focus should be more on pathological facts, so to bring society back to the normal, healthy position. So social fact ले लीजिए, outside mind ले लीजिए, as a thing ले लीजिए, not dependent on the individual's psychological predisposition, sui generis, independent of individual. Divide that in terms of material, non-material and social current. And then talk about its feature in terms of ECG. Divide the generality G into normal and pathological, unusual, unhealthy. And that were the methodological concerns. And the prime central theme of Durkheim in sociology will emerge as the study of social facts. And these social facts would be found in the social institutions. And all these are examples of the social facts. Once the methodological concern has been there, one of the areas from where, apart from the methodology, the maximum quotient comes out is basically division of labor. And the division of labor, publication of division of labor in society in 1893, Durkheim is being division of labor as a social fact and trying to explain it as an historical indicator. I just talked about the indicators: historical, statistical and ethnographical. I am using the first indicator, that is historical indicator in a division of labor. He is basically attempting to describe the fundamental characteristics of modern society. There has been a romanticized idea prevalent among a number of scholars that modern societies are characterized by tensions, differentiations, conflict, implying that the pre-modern societies are harmonious, there are stable relationship. The pre-modern societies are simple, natural, transparent, and not exposed to conflict and tensions as present in the modern society. Durkheim agrees to this statement to a certain extent. Mind few lines of mine. I said Durkheim is agreeing to a certain extent to it. But Durkheim is saying that harmonious, stable relationship could also be found in a modern society. And thus, Durkheim is focusing on the modern form of integration. And when he is looking at, focusing on the modern form of integration, he says that despite emergence of differentiation and specialization, integration is not forfeited. Solidarity can still be found. It's all right, differentiation is taking place, specialization is taking place, but it does not mean that integration is gone, integration is forfeited. Solidarity can still be found in modern society. And thus this looking for the modern form of integration. Durkheim is addressing one prime concern in division of labor. That question has been there to you. That why while becoming autonomous individual depends more on society. The journalistic ideas which is prevalent at Durkheim's time, that modern society is responsible for excessive individualism, which is producing disruptive effects. But Durkheim is saying that this new form of specialization that has emerged in a modern society does not mean that integration is gone, integration is forfeited. On the contrary, more the individual's autonomy, more the dependence of individual on society. Thus, the new social cohesiveness and solidarity is transformed. I repeat, the new social cohesiveness and solidarity is transformed by division of labor. And once again I am saying, thus the prime concern of division of labor, Durkheim's division of labor, is to address that why while becoming autonomous individual depends more on society. Prior to Durkheim, division of labor was explained by the different scholars. And it was different, explained differently by the different scholars. The economists focused on the utility, individual desires, needs. The demographers focused on the population. The neoclassical economists focused on the rationality and other choices. Some focus on the contextual base happening in the modern society. That how the transition is taking from the simple to the modern society. Simple society was less populous, needs were less. There was no specialization. As the population increased, people were assigned to the different kind of tasks, specialization took place. It means before, Durkheim is saying before the specialization took place, before the differentiation took place, society was already knowing that society is different. The contract between the individuals, fine, this is taking place in modern society. But a contract between the individuals is dependent on the non-contractual foundations, the law, the structure, the conditions. And those who are considering demographers, Varmi Khila, those who are talking about the population, Durkheim considers population, but does not talk only about in terms of the volume, number of people. He is speaking of the density, the number of people in a given area, but precisely picks up the moral density, that is integrative relations between individuals. Social facts to be explained by the other social fact. Social facts are to be preceded and succeeded by the social facts. Because if the social facts are not preceded by the objective reality is not preceded by the another objective reality, then the psychological predisposition will emerge out. Individual motives and actions will emerge out. Subjectivity will creep in. So here the division of labor is basically being explained from another social fact, that is population, in which we will be talking about volume, density and the moral density. And once you have done this one, when you talked about the moral dynamic density, then pick up another concept from here related to this one in a linear perspective, that is called the concept of collective conscience. With this concept of collective conscience, Durkheim would be able to explain the perspective of solidarity in two different social structures of society, that is mechanical and organic. Durkheim, through the historical indicator, is basically trying to analyze the evolutionary sequence, the evolutionary dimension of growth from simple to the modern society in terms of mechanical and organic solidarity, by focusing on the supra-individual forces and conditions. In a very simple sentence, let me say, Durkheim's concept of solidarity in division of labor could be explained, could be analyzed through the concept of collective conscience, which is basically a combination of beliefs and sentiments common to average members of society. The belief that cannot be denied, the sentiment which are filled with emotions. The totality of these beliefs and sentiments is the resultant expression of shared collectivity, which has its own life, operates on its own principle. It means it is also sui generis. And if it is sui generis, operating in its own, then it need not be approached from the individual conscience, which manifests internal subjective perception. Rather, collective conscience is outside the mind, implying the external character. And since it operates in the entire society, it has power to influence individual and thus is endowed with a coercive power. Conceptually, collective conscience is expressing the totality of communication, principles, morals, and religious sentiments, comprising the conscience of social grouping, which establishes solidarity throughout society, maintains a moral code binding people together. It is recognized uniformly, and everyone who violates it must be punished severely. The moment say anyone who violates this must be punished severely, it means from here Durkheim's division of labor seems to be intricately linked with law or the legal percept. This law, the legal percept, could be defined, could be approached as a code of conduct that is sanctioned. When the individual is acting, behind his acting there pertains a systematic understanding regarding the demands of society. Can I repeat the line? Social facts are collective ways of thinking, feeling and doing, though it comes through individual. But it is external to him and are endowed with the coercive power. So we are talking about the action of the individual. Behind this action of the individual there pertains systematic understanding regarding the demand of the society. And this demand of society is nothing but the manifestation of collectivity, promoting integrative moral aspect. But you isolate this individual action, it will lead to the pathological state. It means the law will establish a link between individual's desire and social interest. That's why law is an inevitable condition present in every society. Mind my line there. However, we also need to remember that law is not there in society to curb crime. Rather, law is present in society to repair the hurt that collective conscience has received by the violator. If somebody has violated that one, collective conscience is hurt. You need to repair. Law is there to repair that hurt of collective conscience. I don't know how you will be taking the line. Durkheim also said that if there is no deviant in society, society will have to produce one such. Why? Because only through the deviant act, permissibility of the boundary of behavior could be drawn. Law is a state of mind, and law is not there to curb crime. But if anyone who has violated this collectivity, one who has violated, gone against the provision, he must be punished. Because the collective conscience, the collectivity in a society is hurt. And to repair that hurt of that collective conscience, law is present in society. And when the individual would be punished, when the violator would be punished, it is not to frighten him, not to deter him, rather to satisfy and restore the faith in collectivity. And how this restoring the faith in collectivity will be done? By punishing the violator. So there in a simpler society, the nature of law is repressive. And in the modern society, the nature of law is restitutive. More the collective conscience, less is the deviation, more severe is the punishment. So in a mechanical one, in a simple society, the nature of law is repressive. In a modern society, the nature of law is restitutive. Mind my line here. Both these laws can be differentiated from one another by the type of sanction attached. By the type of sanction attached to the violation. Violation of collective conscience in a mechanical or simpler society where the repressive law is there, it results in a punishment aimed at damaging the violator. Thus mutilation, prison, torture of all kinds are the examples of repressive law. Whereas restitutive law does not demand that violator be punished, rather be compelled by the state to undo the hurt. The violator has caused to the victim some harm. Thus it has to be restored as it was. And if restoration is not possible, it must be compensated. It means when you are looking at the modern society, when you are looking at the organic solidarity, the aim of the law is to re-establish the state of things as they should be in accordance with justice. Once we have linked that one, collective conscience, to the law, repressive and restitutive, now you are coming to that how the division of labor manifests two types of social structure, for which Durkheim will be talking about mechanical organic metaphor. Simply, mechanical is similarity of resemblance, similarity between similars. And organic is a similarity between dissimilars. Mechanical solidarity is an attachment that demands severity. In mechanical solidarity, each unit is detachable and is able to exist. Whereas in living organism, though every organ or every unit has a specific function, the degree of specialization of the function of the organ could be viewed, but they are mutually dependent on one another. Thus, as a whole, for continuing of existence, parts rely on one another in such a way that none can exist by itself or replicate itself. I said mechanical solidarity is the similarity between similars. It's similarity of resemblance or attraction between the similars. Manifesting similarity is likeness from which emerges solidarity, where which one is the microcosm of the whole. But Durkheim is also providing the certain kind of causal explanation that in the mechanical solidarity, society is coherent because people are not differentiated. Right from beginning to the end, people are engaged in the similar activities, are similar in thoughts, feelings, doings, and if anyone has violated it, it would be dealt severely, for which the nature of law is repressive. Durkheim now is saying that eventually settlement and agricultural lifestyle generated artisans and leadership qualities, thereby giving way to a specialization, resulting into varying perceptions, knowledge and moral views. People are no more alike now. People are no more alike in their conscience, as differentiation has occurred among them. Thus society passed and evolved from being totally the product of likeness to that of mutual interdependence. With the evolution of the modern society, the same cognitive moral component of society no longer resided in each individual, rather varied from one another, reflecting dissimilarity. But the functional interdependence between them brought similarity, that is, organic solidarity manifests similarity between dissimilars. Individualism is bound to increase, but Durkheim is basically giving the concept of moral individualism. And in this very piece, he is also picking up the homoduplex, that the duality between soul and body, or duality between social being and isolated individuals. Any society in which every individual pursues their self-interest would disintegrate in a very short span of time. With this similarity between the dissimilars, so the differentiation has taken place. The law of nature has also changed, that is from repressive to restitutive. I just talked about what is the objective of restitutive law. But Durkheim is also talking about pathological state, pathological division of labor in terms of anomy, normlessness, weakening of the norms, forced division of labor, and poorly coordinated division of labor. It means now as a sociologist our focus would be in the pathological dimension, so that we can bring back the society into its healthy form. This is the one aspect that we will have to talk about. And another aspect from where very less question has been asked, that is the suicide. But it is one of the very important work of Durkheim. 1897 suicide. And like this division of labor, suicide has been explained by the many scholars differently. Some attributed in terms of individualism, some to the psychological one, some to the biological one, some to the genetics, some to the law of imitation, Gabriel Tard. And despite suicide being an extreme individual act, Durkheim picks up it as a social fact. He says, I as a sociologist is not interested in who the particular individual has committed suicide. Rather, I am looking at those supra-individual forces and conditions which has made the individual to suicide, or which may produce the individual to suicide, or force individual to suicide. And thus, Durkheim is basically focusing on collective supra-individual forces that influence or may influence the individual that act of individual in terms of suicide. Who the particular individual is committing suicide is not important to Durkheim. True, that suicide is usually characterized by the individual motives. But despite this, in a society, if you look at, if you analyze it, you find about society as a stable pattern, which now Durkheim is trying to explain from the social conditions and forces. And Durkheim moves towards empiricism, thereby freeing the analysis of suicide from the pure psychological perspective. Durkheim is focusing on concomitant variable to examine the variations in suicide rate in different populations. He proposes that there is no correlation between psychopathological state with that of suicide. It means Durkheim is now focusing on multiple variables like age, sex, religion in the analysis of suicide, thereby providing multivariant analysis and also focusing on the variations in the suicide rate, for which Durkheim offers specific, dynamic, but less crystallized social current. It means suicide Alright. Social facts to be explained by the social fact. Here we talked about the population. Now here the statistical indicator is being used, in which I talked about the concurrent variable. That how the multiple variable has come out. And this concurrent variable will basically be making Durkheim to analyze the variations in the suicide rate in different populations. And now what he is offering, he is basically offering the social current, which is less crystallized. While less crystallized is a non-materialistic one, non-materialistic social fact. But it is having the same ascendancy and objectivity over the individual, despite it being less obvious. It comes to each one of us and has the power to carry each one of us away. Those social currents are less obvious. They are social facts within which he picks up integration and regulation. So integration high would be altruistic suicide, low would be egoistic suicide, regulation high would be fatalistic suicide, and low would be enemy suicide. So explain this for, you might have gone through in this terms of perspective. In altruistic, the level of integration is very high. Individual has merged his personality with that of the collectivity. And when collectivity demands, individual is ready to sacrifice his life. It is typically the feature of pre-modern or the society with the mechanical solidarity, marked by collectivism in which individual is subjected to the will of collectivity. A strong collectivism provides individual a profound sense of belongingness. Agree? There is a strong collectivism will provide you profound sense of belongingness. It will serve as a life-giving force. But such kind of integration also implies that individual has less significance in comparison to the value of collectivity. So in the circumstances, certain circumstances, if the collectivity demands, the individual sacrifices his life. when the individual fails to live up to the expectations of familial traditions, and when he commits suicide, it is altruistic suicide. So sometimes now we are finding about the sati system, the seppuku, harakiri, so many examples are coming out. But give the example that how when some individual has failed to live up to the familial tradition, familial expectations. So look at that in terms of the altruistic one. And egoistic is where the degree of integration is low. It occurs in the societies where the individual is not well integrated with the larger social unit. Lack of integration may seem meaningless to individual, resulting into a specific distinct current. In other words, individual's level of integration with society is too fragile that the individual considers himself to be separated from collectivity, which sometimes may lead to reduced desire to live. So higher rate of suicide in smaller families than larger families, females having low tendency of suicide than males, childless couples having more prone to suicide than with children, and Protestants committing more suicide than Catholics. These are the examples. Fatalistic, which is the least mentioned type. These two types are nothing to do with integration, but they are basically to deal with the regulation of the society. The fatalistic suicide occurs when the regulatory process of society becomes excessive, blocking and choking the individual due to excessive regulation, oppressive rule or authority. The example of a slave. Enemy is the one from where not only the enemy suicide, but they will be there. It will be found there in a mutton as well. And some questions in the short notes of enemy will be coming out. The enemy suicide has nothing to do with the relations between the people. But it has to do with the way the rules and norms exert pressure on individual behavior. The concept of enemy was introduced in sociology by Durkheim, which literally means normlessness or weakening of norms. Enemy is the condition when the normative pattern, regulating normative pattern has weakened. And in this very perspective, I quote one sentence of Durkheim, that a modern man is not happy with the lot he has received. He wants more. He is guided by the unlimited desire. Man would be happy when there is a very proportionate relationship between his needs and the desires. And this normative order of society keeps a check on his desire. But with the modern man who is guided by the unlimited desire, aspirations, and in pursuance of it many times, man goes against the normative order of society, leading to enemy, which Durkheim considered to be the pathological state. Many times I said, the kind of optimism which has emerged in Durkheim while analyzing division of labor in modern society in terms of searching for the new form of integration, that is jolted, that receives a setback when Durkheim turns his attention to the analysis of modern society, when you're looking at the problems of the modern society, in which the analysis of suicide becomes the more important. And once you have done this one, the suicide, then sometimes they will ask you that how Durkheim analysis of suicide would be used. They ask the questions. Remember, dear there, whenever any questions pertaining to linking with the contemporary times is asked or certain situation is asked, do not deviate from the concept. You first recall back the concept that what are the four types. So in a modern time, they when I ask you such kind of questions which have been there, you look at what kind of suicide from Durkheim could be used and how it could be used. Your first perspective would be when you look at such kind of question is to recall the concepts, remember the structure of the concepts, what that concept has talked about, and then you use this in terms of the need disposition of the question that has been asked to you in a mains. Do not bring something new which has not been talked about concept, because they are mentioning the names. So sometimes unnecessarily we bring about the different kind of perspectives which the scholar has not said. So within the perspective of the scholar, whatever the concept which you have developed, you just try to look at and which way the things will be there. In most of the times in a modern society, generally the egoistic, anomic society could be found. Familial disorganization anomy, sexual deregulation anomy, economic crisis anomy, and I use it such kind of things. This much conceptual clarity is required. Apart from the two concepts, yet another social fact, yet another major important analysis in Durkheim sociology is realism, sociology of realism. And let me say it here, it is still considered to be one of the classical works in sociology of realism. The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, 1912, in which Durkheim has picked up the ethnographic indicators to analyze religion. When I say ethnographic indicators, Durkheim uses the ethnographic data from the research work of others, from the Arunta tribe of Australia, to analyze various variables, such as what contributes to sacred, how society reveals itself in terms of pre-scientific mythologization. So he is basically trying to describe the early processes through which the socio-moral changes started to take place, which is a complex phenomena for which Durkheim would be using the word collective effervescence. When you say collective effervescence, in which the primitive people, the simpler people have gathered together in the shared rituals, and members were merged totally in the sui generis collective reality. And the collective representation that has emerged out of it has permeated the entire society. In this book, Durkheim will also be analyzing the customs, myths, to discuss the essence of religion. Durkheim is saying this Arunta tribe, and the society is Arunta, the society is similar to like this, and other such primitive societies offer a privileged case, as they are simpler in nature, and they are not only simpler in nature, in which the life is reduced to essential traits, so that they are least understood. Let me say that though Durkheim's analysis of religion is based on the findings of others, but the strength of Durkheim lies in the fact that with this he attempts to address more general aim, that is to explain religion elements found in, or to explore the religious elements found in all societies, including the modern ones. Durkheim is also talking about the development of human knowledge. Development of human knowledge about society. The knowledge of society in essence is revealed by the society itself, which though may vary from society to society. The understanding of social in a primitive society is different from the understanding of social to us in a modern society. Durkheim says all religions are true, and thus he focuses on the fundamental theological point of view by citing myths which are sui generis in nature. They are not imaginative stories or fantasies, rather they are representatives of underlying truth in a form understood by the people in society at a specific level of development. I quote Durkheim. It means all religions represent underlying truth about society, a mythologized form that people can understand. The traditional concept of God is a socially generated mythologization of society itself, which is a sui generis reality. The universal nature of religion is organized collectivity, which means religion is always collective in nature, comprising a collective sense of belief and reality. Though sometimes it may not be belief, in a transcendental God. May not be belief in personified God, but almost in all religions, there is a notion of a special power influencing human behavior and distinguishing. And thus here, Durkheim is distinguishing between sacred and profane. Durkheim's distinction of sacred and profane is also making him move away from the earlier theories of origin of religion, animism, animatism and naturism. He says they are unable to distinguish between sacred and profane. The origin part should come later. This distinction between sacred and profane should be the most important one. The essence of religion is always found in the beliefs and rituals that divide the world into sacred and profane. And also, not only the division between sacred and profane, but also a particular behavior toward the sacred. Sacred are objects, symbols, activities that are set apart and forbidden from ordinary life, whereas profane is related to those activities, objects, symbols with which people relate in utilitarian manner. Though there cannot be very tight compartmentalization. The sacred objects may come from the profane world, but once they are elevated with a certain specific power, its nature will change. So when we are making the distinction between sacred and profane, we should not have a very tight compartmentalized one. Sacred will always be set apart and forbidden from the profane, because profane will pollute it. Since profane is related to the mundane activities, the sacred, which is at par excellence, which profane should not touch with impunity. And that's why religious life is always kept distinct from that of the ordinary life. I always say that when you go, either you are going to the temple or Gurdwara or mosque or church, sometimes when you are going from the ordinary life, we try to purify yourself. It means our religious life is distinct from our ordinary life. But Durkheim is, I am quoting Durkheim says, religion did not emerge out of primitive man's need to explain cosmic, often catastrophic natural events. And even if it is so, it might not have produced this effect on primitive man's mind or life, since primitive man is not aware of the fact that cosmic power is superior to him. Thus, religion is not a mystery, it is not an illusion or belief in transcendental God, since throughout human society, man have never worshipped any reality other than collective social reality, transfigured by the faith called God. It means religion is an unified system of beliefs and practices related to sacred things that unite them in one moral commune that is called church to all those who adhere to it. So you make the distinction between sacred and profane. Come out in terms of this one. If you remember the certain statements, it is not a mystery, not an illusion. Transfigured by faith called God. But here, when he is speaking of the distinction between sacred and profane, while having the ethnographic account of others in terms of Arunta tribe, where the presence of totem is there. So he considered totem to be the elementary forms of religious life. People know they are being reacted upon, but by whom is not known. Thus they attribute to the nearby causes, the animals, plants. And thus from here the totem seems to be the elementary forms of religious life. So you will be finding the questions in terms of the sacred and profane. We will also be finding the questions on the totems. Sometimes in the elementary forms of religions. And once you have done this one, that when we say about totem is the earliest form of religion, then you also need to remember that Durkheim is saying that totem is nothing less than a clan or a group. It is personified and presented to the imagination of believers under the visible form of animals and plants. Worshipping totem manifests power of collectivity. When the individual gathers to perform a ritual in collectivity, he comes in an exalted state of mind. This exalted state of mind leads to the loss of self, which is necessary to merge with the collectivity. And once it occurs, the individual is carried away by some sort of external force. He feels ecstasy which he has never felt earlier when he was alone. He thinks and acts differently from the normal behavior, from the normal life. The exaltations lead to the loss of self, necessary for the affirmation of group identity and solidarity. Religion binds people together. And once you become the part of the group, religion also ensures that since you are part of the collectivity, you would not be left alone to face the crisis in your life. Everyone wants to be moral. Today even, when you talk about morality, immorality, today even, in a modern society, even though there are so many acts which seem to be immoral, but prima facie, as a matter of fact, everyone in society wants to be a moral being, which is ensured through participation in religion. By worshipping the totem, you do not worship them. By worshipping the God, you do not worship the God. Rather, we worship the society itself, personified in the visible forms, what I talked about in terms of totems. So there is certain kind of social realism is emerging out. That by worshipping the God, you are not worshipping the God. You are basically worshipping the society itself. And from here, Durkheim is now moving towards the modern form of religion. I said at very beginning that the changes which has taken place in France, which has a deep impact on. For example, if I give you the passing reference in terms of 1789 French Revolution, now when the democracy has been established, monarchy has been replaced, the new kind of rights have emerged out. The liberty, freedom, these have emerged out. People are now gathering to celebrate it. So now from here, the certain questions, in good number of questions are coming from the modern form of religion. It means Durkheim from the totem also picks up the idea of emergence of higher consciousness in religion. Since he believes that sense of belief in transcendental religion will gradually give way to rational, scientific knowledge. But the world still is a sense of something sacred in all societies. There is a sense of belief in transcendental, which is now gradually giving way to the rational scientific knowledge. But some sort of sacred will always be there. An element of cult would be manifested through the new rituals and symbols. This would exist since to individual collectivity always functions as a moral force. Man is man because he lives in society. Take away from him all that is social. Man is nothing but animal or at par with animal. Religion may vary from society to society, but the function of religion is to serve as a unifying force. It will always be there. Religion binds people together and ensures that none would be left alone to face crisis in life. Now Durkheim is talking about the new changes taking place post the French Revolution. He is suggesting some of the criteria for the modern form of religion, which he believes may not be based on belief in a transcendental God. When he says that it may not be based on the belief in a transcendental God, it is also implying that modern man does not treat religion as it was required in the simpler society? Because the science, logic of science has explained so many things that are happening in a society. I quote, that modern man does not need religion as it was required by the primitive man, since the rationality based on science has made modern man to know the causes behind most of the happenings. In modern society, there has emerged number of ceremonies, rituals, symbols, which has nothing to do with the traditional god and goddesses. People now gather to praise the nations, new institutions, liberty, freedom, universal rights, contributing to the emergence of new form of religious consciousness is emerging out. The form of nationalism that has emerged in the modern society reflects new collectivity, providing meaning to man's existence in the new form. So from there, pick up the methodology, division of labor, sociology of religion, and look at a certain kind of criticisms of that one, of the social fact, of the suicide, prepare few. And once again I am saying that if you forget certain scholars, don't quote the wrong one. You simply write it in terms of what you have recalled back. But please do not quote the wrong scholars in terms of making it there. Tomorrow is Sunday, so I think that some of you who will be watching it will be looking at and will be going through it. So go through it. We will be meeting on Monday. I wish all of you the best of luck. Thank you.